Ever watched your perfect suburban life unravel over a backyard barbecue? I did flipping burgers while my wife slipped behind the garage with our neighbor. That was the day I realized she wasn't just bored, she was ready to torch everything we built. But instead of rage, I chose something far more unsettling: patience. Because some betrayals deserve more than confrontation, they deserve consequences you feel long after the silence starts. My name is Daniel Miller. I'm 38, a systems engineer living just outside Denver. If you'd asked anyone to describe me, they'd have said I'm steady, predictable. The guy who mows his lawn on Saturday mornings, pays bills on time, never forgets to take out the trash. Maybe that's why it took me longer than it should have to see what was right in front of me. It was a Saturday afternoon in June. The kind of afternoon people romanticize about suburban life: kids darting between yards, someone's music drifting over fences, neighbors making small talk while pretending they cared about each other's vacation plans. I was at the grill, flipping burgers with one hand, a cold beer in the other. Rachel, my wife, was somewhere behind me, mingling with everyone like she always did. She had a way of making people feel like they were the only ones in the room. I didn't notice she'd disappeared until the third burger was done and she still hadn't come back for plates. At first, I figured she'd gone inside to grab more drinks. But when I looked across the yard, I saw her behind the hedge by the garage. She wasn't alone. Marcus stood there with her, our neighbor from across the cul-de-sac. He was talking too close, smiling like he just won something. It wasn't what they were doing that got me, it was how natural it looked. Like this wasn't the first time they'd found a corner to themselves. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But I felt it in my chest anyway, the certainty that something had shifted. I watched them a moment longer. Her hand rested lightly on his elbow. His hovered at her waist, too familiar to dismiss. Then she laughed and turned back toward the patio, leaving Marcus standing there with a look I couldn't name. When she reached me at the grill, she slipped into the same easy smile she used when she wanted to avoid questions. "Need another drink?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I studied her face, waiting for a sign of guilt, but there was nothing. Just calm, practiced warmth. "No," I said finally. "But you and Marcus looked like you were having fun." Her smile didn't waver, though her eyes flicked away. "We were just talking." "You think I don't see it?" My voice was quiet, low enough that no one around us could hear. "See what?" She shrugged, like I'd accused her of forgetting to water the plants. "The way you look at him." Her reply was so measured it almost sounded bored. "You'll get over it." That was the moment something in me locked into place. Not rage, not grief, just the clear realization that she had already decided what the story would be. She would keep it vague, say just enough to make me look unreasonable if I pushed. I didn't respond. I turned back to the grill, flipped the last burger, and set it on a plate. That night, she pretended nothing was different. She lay in bed facing the wall, breathing slow and even, as though she were already asleep. I knew she wasn't. I knew she was waiting to see if I would bring it up again. I didn't. Instead, I lay there staring at the ceiling, running through every conversation we'd had in the past 6 months. Every time she'd been late getting home. Every time she'd laughed at something on her phone and turned it over before I could see the screen. By morning, I knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to accuse her in front of our friends. I was going to do something she wouldn't expect. After she left for work, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my laptop. I searched for therapists in the area, read reviews until I found one who specialized in marriage counseling. Her name was Dr. Camden. Clean website. Lots of testimonials about how she helped couples find clarity. That was exactly what I wanted: clarity recorded somewhere official, somewhere she couldn't dismiss later. I booked the earliest available appointment that didn't look desperate. The following Thursday at 9 a.m. I clicked the box that said both parties had consented. She could argue about it later if she wanted, but by then it would be on the calendar. When she got home that evening, Rachel acted like the day had been ordinary. She kissed my cheek, asked about dinner, made small talk about a show she'd been watching. I listened, nodded, pretended to care. After she went upstairs, I opened our shared calendar and dropped the appointment in. No explanation, no comment. Just the title, Counseling Dr. Camden. The next morning, I watched her as she scrolled through her phone while blending her smoothie. When she got to the calendar notification, her thumb froze. She didn't look at me. She locked her phone, set it on the counter, and walked out of the kitchen without a word. I let her go. Because this was no longer about catching her in a lie. It was about making her say it out loud. I'd spent too long assuming I was imagining things. That ended the moment I saw her behind the garage. This was the start of something she couldn't control, with half smiles and vague denials. And I was ready to see who she really was when she couldn't hide behind them anymore. Rachel didn't bring up the therapy appointment for 2 days. She moved through the house with the same practiced ease, like she'd decided that ignoring it would make it disappear. If she thought I would be the first to break the silence, she was wrong. On Wednesday morning, she finally asked. I was pouring coffee when she stepped into the kitchen and rested her hand lightly on the counter. Is there something you want to talk about? She asked, her voice neutral. I didn't look up. Everything we need to say can wait until tomorrow. A short silence followed. She hated not being in control of a conversation. I let the pause stretch until she shifted her weight, uneasy. I don't think therapy is necessary, she said after a moment. I know you're upset, but this is getting. Tomorrow, I repeated calmly. She closed her mouth. She understood then that she wasn't going to negotiate her way out of this. The rest of that day passed in a polite routine. She made dinner. We sat at the table and discussed trivial things, the sprinkler schedule, a work event she was thinking of skipping. I contributed just enough to keep up the appearance of normal. But underneath it, we both knew something was moving closer. That night, she tried again. I was brushing my teeth when she leaned against the doorway. If you think I've done something unforgivable, she said, I wish you'd just tell me. I met her eyes in the mirror. You'll have the chance to explain tomorrow. Her expression flickered. She looked as though she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She turned and walked away. Thursday morning came clear and cool. We drove in silence. Rachel stared out the passenger window, tapping her fingers against her knee. She only did that when she was nervous. The counseling office was in a renovated building on a quiet street. Rachel didn't say anything as we walked up the stairs. She signed the intake forms with a steady hand, but I could tell she was bracing for something she couldn't quite define. Dr. Camden greeted us in the waiting area. She was older, calm, with the kind of presence that made people tell the truth even if they didn't mean to. She led us to a small room with 2 chairs and a low table between them. We sat down and the silence felt heavier than I expected. So, Dr. Camden began, what brings you both here today? Rachel looked down at her hands, then back up at the therapist. She exhaled slowly, buying herself a few seconds. I think we've been disconnected, she said. Things have felt strained. I didn't interrupt. Dr. Camden nodded. Can you be more specific? Rachel glanced at me, then quickly looked away. There's been tension. I think maybe we're both unhappy. Unhappy. That was her word for it. Do you feel safe in this relationship? The therapist asked her. Rachel nodded too quickly. Yes. Daniel's never, he's always been steady. It's not that. What is it, then? She hesitated, her voice softer. I don't know exactly. Maybe I felt like I wasn't being seen. I watched her carefully. That was the first honest thing she'd said. Has there been someone else? Dr. Camden asked, her tone gentle. Rachel's shoulders went rigid. For a moment, she didn't answer. There's been an emotional connection, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. With Marcus. The therapist didn't react. She simply nodded, as if this were routine. And what does that mean to you? Rachel swallowed. It means he was there when I felt alone. I know how it sounds. But nothing happened. Her eyes flicked to me, searching for a reaction. I gave her none. Dr. Camden turned to me. Daniel, how are you processing this? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. My voice stayed steady. I'm not surprised, I said. I've watched it develop for a while. But hearing her say it out loud is different. Rachel looked down. For the first time, she seemed ashamed. What do you want to happen from here? The therapist asked. I didn't answer right away. I let the question hang in the air. Rachel shifted in her seat, trying to prepare for whatever was coming. I want space, I said at last. I think that's the right first step. Her head snapped up, but she caught herself before she could protest. I'm not leaving, I added calmly. I just want the air to clear. Rachel's expression turned wary, but she didn't argue. She knew if she pushed too hard, she'd look defensive. When the session ended, I thanked Dr. Camden and walked out without waiting for Rachel. She followed a few seconds later. The ride home was silent. I could feel her glancing at me now and then, but I kept my eyes on the road. She wanted to ask what I was planning. I wasn't going to give her that comfort. That night, she tried to act like nothing had changed. She set the table for dinner, poured 2 glasses of wine, even put on a playlist she knew I liked. But I didn't sit down. I took my glass, walked out to the porch, and stood there until the sky went dark. Through the window, I could see her sitting alone at the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She stayed there for a long time, waiting for me to come back inside. I didn't, because she needed to understand something. This wasn't going to be resolved with apologies and soft language. It wasn't going to be smoothed over by pretending the truth wasn't already here. She had spent months deciding how to rewrite the story in her favor. Now it was my turn to decide how it would end. The days after therapy felt oddly calm. Rachel tried to pretend that naming her attachment to Marcus had somehow closed the subject. She'd smile when I walked into the kitchen, ask if I wanted coffee, mention small things about work. But her voice carried a hesitation she couldn't disguise. I didn't meet her halfway. I went to work, kept to my schedule, came home without explanation. The silence between us wasn't passive. It was deliberate. She was waiting for me to explode or forgive her. I did neither. On Friday afternoon, I came home early. The sun was low behind the mountains, turning the neighborhood gold. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a minute, collecting myself. I'd decided something that morning. I was done waiting for her to feel remorse. When I stepped into the garage, Marcus was there, leaning against my workbench with a bottle in his hand like he belonged there. He looked up when he heard the door. His eyes searched my face for a clue about whether he should smile or brace himself. "Hey, man," he said, like this was just another casual visit. "Rachel said you might be up for talking." I closed the car door slowly, watching him. "She did." Marcus shifted, trying to appear relaxed. "Look, I get that this is awkward, but I wanted to clear the air before it turned into something worse." "Worse?" I repeated, my voice flat. "Yeah," he said, moving his hand as if to gesture at some invisible mess between us. "Nobody wants drama. It was all just a misunderstanding." He seemed to expect me to interrupt, to argue. I didn't. I let him talk himself into smaller and smaller justifications. "Nothing happened," he said quickly. "We were close, sure, but it was never physical. I swear." I opened the mini fridge beneath the workbench and took out another bottle. I popped the cap off and set it on the bench between us. "You want it?" I asked. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. He took the beer and lifted it halfway to his mouth before stopping. "You're not going to say anything?" I pulled a stool out and sat down. "What would you like me to say?" He blinked, thrown off. "I don't know. That you're mad. That you want me to stay away." I leaned forward just enough to meet his eyes. "Do you think I don't already know what you've done?" He swallowed. "I'm telling you nothing happened." "But you wanted it to," I said calmly. Marcus looked away. "That's not fair." "It's accurate," I replied. He took a breath, trying to regain control. "Look, she was lonely. She said you were distant. I was just trying to be there as a friend." I almost laughed at that. "You think that makes it better?" He didn't answer. I stood up. He watched me carefully, as if expecting me to swing at him. Instead, I picked up a rag and started wiping down a wrench that didn't need cleaning. "We're done here," I said without turning. He didn't argue. He set his bottle down and walked out, closing the garage door behind him. I stayed where I was, listening to the quiet. My hands were steady. I'd been worried I'd lose control, but I felt clearer than I had in months. That night, Rachel tried a different tactic. She suggested we host poker night again. I knew exactly why. She wanted proof that everything was normal, that our lives hadn't changed. "Sure," I said. "Let's invite Marcus too." Her expression cracked for just a second, but she recovered quickly. "If you want." "I do." Saturday evening, everyone arrived at 7. I set up the table and made sure Marcus sat between Brian and Mitch, two guys who never missed a chance to needle someone who'd crossed a line. The game started harmless enough. Cards, small talk, cheap whiskey. But once people were comfortable, the tone shifted. Brian glanced at Marcus over his cards. "So, you ever get that feeling you're somewhere you don't belong?" Marcus forced a laugh. "What's that supposed to mean?" Mitch dealt the next hand without looking up. "Just saying. Some people can't read a room." Rachel kept to the kitchen, pretending she didn't hear. But she heard every word. Marcus tried to play it off, but his hands started to tremble. He folded on a decent hand. He excused himself to the bathroom and stayed gone for 10 minutes. When he came back, his face was pale. He sat down without a word. "Bluffing again?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Marcus didn't answer. He picked up his drink and stared at it. By the end of the night, he couldn't hide how rattled he was. When he finally stood to leave, he didn't look at anyone. He mumbled something about a headache and walked out. After the door closed, Brian leaned back in his chair. "That guy's off lately." I shrugged. Everyone has something they're not saying. Rachel came into the living room to collect glasses. Her hands were steady, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Feel better?" she asked quietly when we were alone. "No," I said. "But it's a start." She didn't reply. That night, she lay awake next to me. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel the questions she was holding back. But I stayed silent, because I wanted her to understand something simple. When you betray someone who notices everything, you don't get to decide when the reckoning is over. She had spent months believing she controlled the narrative. Now, every move she made felt like it belonged to me instead. The morning after poker night, the house felt hollow. Rachel moved quietly, putting away dishes and wiping down counters that were already clean. She was trying to fill the silence with routine. I let her. She needed something to do while she waited to see what I'd do next. I made coffee and watched her set 2 mugs on the table. She looked tired but kept her voice steady. You planned that, she said, not quite accusing. I didn't say a word to anyone, I replied. She shook her head. You didn't have to. You wanted them to humiliate him. I took a sip and didn't answer. Because she was right, but admitting it would only give her something to fight against. She sat down across from me. What do you expect this to accomplish? Perspective. She closed her eyes, frustrated. Daniel, this isn't helping. It's not meant to help, I said calmly. It's meant to clarify. She stood abruptly, pushing back her chair. You think this makes you better than him? Than me? I didn't answer. Rachel left the kitchen and didn't come back. The rest of the weekend passed in uneasy silence. She stayed busy, running errands, folding laundry, wiping down the same countertop over and over. I spent most of my time in the garage, fixing small things that didn't need fixing. She watched me from the doorway once or twice as if trying to decide whether to confront me or leave me alone. In the end, she did neither. On Tuesday afternoon, I was raking leaves in the front yard when Jonah, the neighbor 2 doors down, came over. He was a friendly guy who always seemed to have a gadget in his hand. That day, it was his phone. Hey, Daniel, he said quietly. Got something you might want to see. I paused, leaning on the rake. What is it? He glanced around before turning the screen toward me. A video played grainy footage from his security camera. Rachel and Marcus behind the garage at the barbecue. Her hand on his arm. His hand resting on her back. A brief, private moment that didn't look accidental. You should have this, Jonah said. I didn't ask why he'd saved it. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much it meant to me. I just nodded. Send it. He tapped a few buttons and handed the phone back. Take care, man. I watched him walk away, then replayed the video. There it was, undeniable. All the vague words and half-denials ended in that single clip. I slipped my phone into my pocket and went back to raking leaves. The movement felt steady, almost calming. When I finished, I carried the rake to the garage and leaned it against the wall. Inside, Rachel was on the couch with her laptop. She looked up when I passed, her face expectant. Everything okay? Fine, I said. She nodded like she believed me. I waited until dusk. Then, without warning, I walked across the street. Marcus was in his driveway watering a strip of grass that hadn't been green in months. He straightened when he saw me. Hey, he called cautiously. I didn't answer right away. I stopped a few feet from him and took out my phone. The video started playing before he realized what I was doing. He watched in stunned silence. When it ended, he looked at me with wide eyes. Daniel. I held up a finger. No more words. He swallowed. I didn't mean to. You did. His jaw tightened. She said you were distant. That you'd already checked out. I didn't respond. He set the hose down. I'm sorry. No, I said quietly. You're embarrassed. Marcus looked away. For the first time, he seemed aware that the neighbors were watching. A curtain shifted across the street. Someone pretended to check their mailbox. He didn't try to defend himself again. I turned and walked back across the street without saying another word. I wanted him to stand there and feel every second of exposure. Rachel was watching from the front window. She stepped back when she realized I'd seen her. Inside, she was pacing the living room. When I closed the door, she stopped. What did you do? She demanded. I showed him the truth. Her face fell. You humiliated him in front of everyone. No, I said calmly. He did that himself. Her shoulders dropped. And what about me? What about you? I've apologized. I've explained. What else do you want? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I want you to feel it. The way I did. Rachel's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. So this is revenge? No, I said. It's reality. She covered her face with her hands. I left her standing there and walked into the kitchen. That night, I slept in the guest room. She didn't come to find me. 2 days later, she started packing a bag. I watched her fold clothes, moving carefully as if I might stop her. I'm going to stay with my sister, she said finally. I nodded. She zipped the bag and hesitated. Is this it? No, I said. It's the beginning. Her eyes searched mine, waiting for something: anger, forgiveness, any sign that I still cared enough to fight. I gave her nothing. When she left, she didn't look back. I stood in the doorway listening to her car start. In the silence that followed, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt free. Because she'd finally understood, some things can't be smoothed over. Some betrayals don't end with apologies. They end with consequences. Rachel's car disappeared down the street. I didn't watch it turn the corner. I closed the door and stood there for a while, taking in the quiet. It wasn't relief or satisfaction I felt. It was the steady certainty that I'd finally stopped waiting for her to decide who we were. The next few days were unremarkable on the surface. I went to work, came home, read before bed. But everything felt different. The house seemed larger. The spaces between my routines had room to breathe. People noticed. My sister called to check in. My manager at work asked if everything was okay at home. I told them it was fine. That wasn't a lie. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending. Rachel didn't reach out right away. I expected she'd text or call within a day, trying to soften the distance she'd created. Instead, there was nothing. That silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. A week later, she came back for a few things. She didn't knock. I was in the backyard, trimming branches along the fence line. She stood by the gate until I looked up. "I'm just grabbing some clothes," she said quietly. "All right." She moved through the house carefully as if she thought I might start a fight. I stayed outside, giving her space. When she came out, she paused by the back steps. "I thought about calling you," she said. I didn't answer. "I didn't know if you'd pick up." "I might not have," I replied. She nodded, staring at the ground. "I'm sorry for all of it." "I know." Rachel waited like she expected me to say more. When I didn't, she lifted her bag and walked to her car. I watched her go this time. Not because I was hoping she'd turn around, but because I needed to see it end. After that, the house stayed quiet. I adjusted to it slowly. I started waking up earlier. I went running in the mornings. I began eating at a diner down the road instead of sitting at our kitchen table. No one there knew my history. No one asked about my marriage. A month passed. Then another. I didn't call her. She didn't call me. It was strange how quickly I learned to stop expecting her voice in the next room. Some evenings I'd think about the way she used to stand by the window waiting for me to come home. About how she'd smile as though nothing could go wrong. I didn't miss those moments. I missed who I thought she was. That was the part that took the longest to let go. One morning I got a text from her sister. "Rachel started therapy. She's trying to figure herself out. Thought you should know." I read it twice and set the phone aside. There was nothing in me that felt triumph or regret. Just a quiet understanding that this was her work to do, not mine. A few days later, she showed up again. It was a Sunday. The air was cool and clear. I was wiping down the patio furniture when the gate clicked open. "I should have called," she said as she stepped closer. "You didn't need to." Rachel swallowed. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here?" She took a breath. "I've been thinking about everything. About us. About what I did." "Good." Her eyes searched mine. "I wanted to understand why it happened. I know that doesn't fix anything, but..." "It doesn't," I said simply. She nodded. "I know." There was no bitterness in my voice, no accusation. She seemed to notice that. "I was lonely," she said. "And I blamed you for that. But it wasn't fair. You were there. I just wasn't willing to say what I needed." I didn't argue. It wasn't my responsibility to help her feel better about her choices. "I thought you'd always be there, no matter how far I drifted," she continued. "I took that for granted." "You did," I agreed. Silence settled between us. She looked at the ground. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say it." I studied her carefully. She looked smaller somehow. Not weak, just stripped of all the excuses she'd used to protect herself. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. Rachel's shoulders dropped. She looked relieved and disappointed at the same time. "Are you okay?" she asked finally. "I am," I told her. It was the truth. She nodded. "That's good." Neither of us moved. For a long moment, I thought she might try to hug me, but she didn't. She turned and walked back to her car. I didn't watch her drive away. I went inside and sat at the table alone. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt honest. A week later, I started taking small steps to rebuild my life. I signed up for a running group. I met new people who knew nothing about my past. I spent less time thinking about what she was doing, more time thinking about what I wanted. Some evenings, I still remembered how it felt when I first realized she'd betrayed me. That hollow ache in my chest. The disbelief that someone you trusted could make choices that careless. But the memory didn't sting the way it once had. Because she'd shown me something I couldn't ignore. When you depend on someone else to define your worth, you lose yourself. And I was finished living that way. She reached out one last time a month later. A short message. "I hope you're okay." "I'm sorry." I read it. I didn't reply. Because forgiveness isn't always about letting someone back in. Sometimes it's about letting yourself move on. That was my choice. The one thing she couldn't touch. And in the end, it was enough.